The warrior's demonstration. Picture this: a human figure floating in perfect stillness against the star field, surrounded by 20 disabled training drones. No sound except controlled breathing. No movement except the slow rotation of distant stars. Then, in less than 3 seconds, the figure explodes into motion. Not the clumsy flailing you might expect in zero gravity, but something else entirely. Liquid lightning, controlled chaos, a 3-dimensional dance that treats empty space like solid ground. When the movement stops, all 20 drones are disabled. Precision strikes to power cores, sensor arrays, weapon systems. The figure floats motionless again, breathing unchanged, as if defying physics itself. This is the story of Master Chen Wei, the man who took humanity's greatest weakness, our dependence on gravity, and forged it into our deadliest advantage. The creator of the void dance, the teacher who showed the children of the burn that in space, the most graceful killer wins. Part 1. The Crippled Warrior, 045 to 545. Narrator. Year 156 aboard the Ardent Flame. Chen Wei was 34 years old and dying by degrees of uselessness. He had been a combat instructor on Earth, traditional martial arts, close quarters combat, the kind of fighting that assumed gravity would always pull you down and solid ground would always catch you. But the evacuation from Earth had stolen that from him. A piece of debris during the launch had crushed his spine, leaving him unable to tolerate the ship's artificial gravity zones. For 29 years, Chen had been confined to the zero-gravity sections of the ship. Cargo bays, maintenance tunnels, the spaces between decks where normal humans struggled to move without looking like drowning fish. But Chen had adapted. In the weightless corridors, he was graceful, efficient. He could navigate the ship's skeleton with an elegance that would have been impossible on Earth. The problem was, elegance meant nothing when you couldn't teach anyone else to fight. The ship's security forces trained in the artificial gravity sections, learning combat techniques designed for planetary warfare. They were competent enough when dealing with shipboard emergencies that stayed in the gravity zones. But space was vast, and not all threats respected the boundaries of artificial gravity. Chen had been watching the younger generation, the ship-sense children who moved through the vessel like they were born to it. Children like Maya Sol's students, who could feel the ship's systems like extensions of their own nervous systems. They had gifts that would have seemed impossible on Earth, but they were defenseless. The pirates came on a Tuesday. Cargo Bay 7 suffered a catastrophic decompression when their ship punched through the hull plating. Emergency bulkheads sealed the breach, but not before 12 armed raiders in vacuum suits had boarded through the gap. Chen watched from the observation deck as the ship's security team responded. Powered armor, military-grade weapons, everything they needed to handle the threat. Except for one problem. The engagement was happening in zero gravity. The security team moved like toddlers learning to walk. Their Earth-trained instincts betrayed them at every turn. They pushed off surfaces too hard, spinning out of control. They fired weapons that sent them tumbling backwards. They tried to take cover behind objects that provided no leverage for return fire. The pirates cut through them like wheat. But it was what happened next that broke Chen's heart. The ship-sense children, teenagers with reflexes honed by decades in zero gravity, tried to help. David Santos, 14 years old, moved through the chaos with natural grace, trying to reach wounded security officers. Lisa Park, 16, attempted to disable a pirate's weapon system using her intuitive understanding of ship technology. The pirates killed them with casual efficiency. Children who could have been warriors died because no one had taught them to be dangerous. After the incident, Chen floated in maintenance shaft C7, staring at the memorial wall where 2 new names had been added. Maya Sol found him there, her consciousness partially merged with the ship's neural networks as she conducted post-incident repairs. "I was supposed to protect them," Chen said, his voice hollow. "These children with their impossible gifts, And I can't even teach them to defend themselves because everything I know assumes gravity exists. Maya's response changed everything. So learn to fight without it. Chen began studying the ship's sense children more carefully. He watched David Santos navigate the maintenance tunnels, flowing through narrow passages like he was swimming through air. He observed Lisa Park use wall contact for momentum redirection, turning the ship's geometry into a personal transportation network. These children weren't fighting gravity. They were dancing with momentum itself. Part 2. First Movements. Chen's revelation began with a single observation. The ship sense children moved nothing like Earth humans trying to adapt to zero gravity. They moved like zero gravity was their natural environment. David Santos, now 15, could push off a wall and navigate through 3 course corrections using only fingertip contact with passing surfaces, arriving at his destination with perfect momentum control. Lisa Park could rotate through complex maintenance tasks while maintaining constant motion, never coming to a complete stop, never wasting energy on unnecessary correction. But Marcus Kim, the eldest at 17, demonstrated something that made Chen's combat instructor instincts sit up and take notice. During a routine cargo transfer drill, a container broke free from its magnetic restraints. 2 tons of medical supplies tumbling end over end toward a group of younger children. Marcus reacted without thinking. He pushed off from the deck plating, contacted the container's corner with his left hand to redirect its spin, used that contact to launch himself in a spiral trajectory that brought him to the bulkhead, pushed off again to intercept the container's new path, and guided it into a soft collision with the opposite wall. The entire sequence took 4 seconds. Marcus never came to a complete stop. His movement was fluid, efficient, and absolutely impossible according to Earth-based physics training. He's not fighting gravity, Chen realized. He's dancing with momentum. Chen began working with Marcus privately, analyzing the movement patterns that came naturally to the ship's sense generation. What he discovered revolutionized his understanding of combat. In gravity, fighting was about generating power through ground contact, leverage, and mass displacement. But in zero gravity, power came from rotational momentum, vector redirection, and the accumulation of angular velocity. Chen developed the first formal technique, the spiral flow. By initiating a controlled spin and using contact points to redirect rather than stop momentum, a fighter could build tremendous striking power while maintaining positional flexibility. He demonstrated for Marcus by attacking a practice dummy. Chen pushed off from the wall, initiated a slow spin, contacted the ceiling to accelerate his rotation, used that momentum to power a devastating strike to the dummy's center mass, and continued the motion into a controlled recovery position. The dummy's sensor readings were incredible. The final strike carried more power than any gravity-based technique Chen had ever mastered. "This isn't how fighting works," Marcus argued. "Where's the stance? Where's the foundation? You're just floating around." Chen's response was a demonstration Marcus would never forget. In one fluid motion, Chen approached the teenager, redirected Marcus's own momentum into a joint lock that left him completely helpless, and guided both of them to a gentle stop against the practice mats. Marcus hadn't been hurt. He'd barely felt the contact, but he was utterly controlled, unable to move, with Chen's arm positioned to disable him instantly if needed. "In gravity, we fight against the ground," Chen explained, releasing the hold. "In the void, we dance with the universe. Every action creates reaction. Every movement opens opportunity. Fighting becomes conversation with physics itself." Over the following weeks, Chen codified his observations into training principles. First, flow over force. Continuous movement was more efficient than starting and stopping. Combat became about redirecting energy rather than generating new power. Second, environment partnership. The ship's geometry wasn't an obstacle to work around. It was a combat partner. Walls, ceilings and equipment became extensions of the fighter's reach. Third, three-dimensional thinking. Earth combat was essentially two-dimensional, with up and down fixed by gravity. Void combat treated all directions as equivalent, opening tactical possibilities that simply couldn't exist on planetary surfaces. Chen's first students progressed with startling speed. The ship-sense children didn't need to unlearn gravity-based instincts because they'd never developed them. They absorbed the void dance principles like their minds had been designed for this kind of thinking. Within weeks, David Santos could disable practice opponents twice his size using momentum redirection alone. Lisa Park developed an uncanny ability to predict where enemies would be 3 moves in advance, positioning herself for attacks that seemed to come from impossible angles. Part 3. The system emerges by year 158. What had begun as desperate improvisation had evolved into a comprehensive martial art, unlike anything in human history. Chen organized the techniques into 3 major categories, each building on principles that would have been meaningless to Earth-based martial artists. The basic level was called flow states, techniques for maintaining continuous movement in 3-dimensional space. Tidal flow used breath control and micro-movements for positional adjustment. Current riding exploited the ship's artificial gravity gradients and air circulation patterns. Surface dancing involved wall and ceiling contact without losing momentum. The intermediate level applied flow state principles to actual fighting. Spiral strikes used rotational momentum to build devastating impact power. Redirection techniques turned opponents' momentum against them. Zero-point control achieved perfect stillness relative to one's target. Masters could appear to teleport by matching their velocity exactly to an opponent's. The master level integrated environmental factors and multiple opponents. 3-body problem applied gravitational dynamics to multi-opponent scenarios. Weapon integration adapted traditional weapons for zero-gravity use. Environmental exploitation turned the ship itself into a combat ally. As the void dance spread throughout the ship's population, it became more than just combat training. The fluid movements evolved into artistic expression. Children performed exhibition forms during cultural events, their bodies becoming living sculptures in 3-dimensional space. The dance forms told stories, the evacuation from Earth, the long journey through space, the hope of eventual return. But they also served as meditation, physical therapy, and social bonding. Couples developed partnered forms that were both intimate and beautiful. Families created generational forms that passed technique and philosophy from parents to children. Maya's soul, now fully integrated with the ship's consciousness, watched a training session with growing wonder. 50 students moved through synchronized forms, their bodies tracing complex patterns that seemed to respond to the ship's own rhythms. "They're not just learning to fight," she observed to Chen. "They're learning to think in dimensions we never had access to on Earth. This isn't adaptation, it's evolution." Chen nodded, watching his students flow through movements that would have been impossible in gravity. The ship is teaching them. Through the void dance, they're developing the same 3-dimensional awareness that allows you to interface with the neural networks. That observation led to the most advanced development yet, the integration of ship sensibilities with void dance techniques. Students with neural sensitivity began incorporating real-time system feedback into their combat forms. They could sense threats through the ship's sensors, predict opponent movements through micro-vibrations in the hull plating, even coordinate group tactics through shared neural interfaces. The children of the burn were becoming something unprecedented, warriors who fought with the ship itself as their partner, using technology and biology in seamless integration. But they hadn't been tested in real combat. That was about to change. Part 4. First Blood. The second pirate incursion came in year 163, 7 years after Chen had begun developing the void dance. This time, the raiders were better prepared. They'd heard stories about the first attack, tales of humans who moved strangely in zero gravity, security forces that had been slaughtered despite superior equipment. The pirates brought more ships, heavier weapons, and tactical plans designed to exploit human weaknesses in weightless combat. They expected clumsy resistance from gravity-bound refugees. They were catastrophically wrong. Cargo Bay 12 exploded inward as shaped charges punched through the hull plating. 30 raiders in military-grade vacuum suits poured through the gap, weapons powered, sensors active, ready for easy targets. Instead, they found Lisa Park. Now 22 and a master of the void dance, Lisa moved through the decompressing cargo bay like she belonged there. While the pirates struggled with the sudden atmospheric loss, she flowed between floating debris with movements that seemed to predict where every piece of wreckage would be 3 seconds in advance. Her first target never saw her coming. Lisa used a tumbling cargo container as a stepping stone, launched herself in a spiral trajectory that brought her behind the pirate's position, and delivered a precise strike to his suit's life support system. He didn't die. The suit sealed automatically, but he was out of the fight, floating helplessly as his maneuvering thrusters failed. David Santos arrived with his 3-person combat team as the pirates tried to establish a defensive perimeter. At 21, David had become Chen's most gifted student, capable of movements that seemed to violate conservation of momentum. The team attacked in coordinated spiral flow formation. David initiated a complex rotation that used the bay's geometry to build angular velocity, while his partners Elena Rodriguez and Marcus Kim began their own spirals at calculated intervals. The pirates' targeting systems couldn't track movement that treated 3-dimensional space like a dance floor. Their predictive algorithms were designed for linear, gravity-bound movement. The void dance practitioners moved in helixes, spirals, and complex curves that created constant false targeting data. David's team disabled 6 pirates in the first 30 seconds of engagement, using precision strikes to weapon systems, suit joints, and sensor arrays. They never stopped moving, never presented static targets, never gave the enemy time to adapt. But the true demonstration of the void dance's evolution came when Marcus Kim, now Chen's senior student, began using the cargo bay itself as a weapon. Marcus triggered a controlled artificial gravity fluctuation that sent loose cargo tumbling in a specific pattern. He used air pressure differentials from the hull breach to redirect the trajectory of disabled pirates. He even exploited the ship's rotation to create Coriolis effects that made straight-line movement impossible for his opponents. The pirates found themselves fighting not just human warriors, but the ship itself. Every surface became a potential launch point for attacks from impossible angles. Every piece of equipment became a projectile guided by fighters who understood orbital mechanics at an intuitive level. The raid's conclusion came when Marcus demonstrated the ultimate void dance technique, the stillness strike. The pirate commander had taken position near the hull breach, using it as an escape route while directing his remaining forces. Marcus approached through a complex spiral that brought him to the exact center of the cargo bay, then began a calculated deceleration sequence. Using contact with debris, micro-adjustments of body position, and precise timing with the ship's rotation, Marcus achieved perfect zero momentum relative to his target. From the commander's perspective, Marcus simply appeared behind him, motionless, as if he had teleported through space. The neural strike was delivered with surgical precision, a touch to the commander's neck that disrupted his nervous system without permanent damage. The pirate collapsed, unconscious but alive, as Marcus used the interaction to begin a new momentum sequence that carried him safely away from return fire. The surviving pirates retreated within minutes, but not before their suit recorders captured footage of humans moving through zero gravity like it was their natural environment. The recordings spread through pirate networks, criminal organizations, and eventually intelligence services across known space. The reports described encounters with humans who move like ghosts, fighters who use empty space as solid ground, and warriors who dance through bullets. The reputation of the ardent flame began to change. Word spread that the refugee ship carried something dangerous. After the battle, Chen reviewed the combat recordings with growing amazement. His students had exceeded his wildest expectations. They weren't just fighting in zero gravity, they were fighting with zero gravity as their ally. "We're not teaching them to adapt to space," he told Maya. "We're teaching them to make space adapt to them, to turn physics from an obstacle into an advantage." Maya's response was prophetic. "When we meet the Vorex, they'll expect human fighters to move like Earth humans, linear, predictable, limited by gravity-born instincts. They won't be prepared for warriors who dance with momentum itself." Part 5. The Master's Legacy. By year 170, Chen Wei had formalized the void dance into a complete martial art with defined advancement levels, philosophical principles, and cultural integration that extended far beyond mere combat training. Chen established 9 levels of mastery, divided into 3 categories. The novice levels taught fundamental spatial awareness. The adept levels applied these principles to combat. The master levels transcended normal human limitations. The void dance became central to Children of the Burn identity in ways Chen had never anticipated. Coming-of-age rituals involved mastering specific forms that demonstrated not just physical skill, but spiritual understanding of humanity's place in the void. Ship ceremonies featured void dance exhibitions that told the story of humanity's journey through movement and grace. Chen's final teachings went far beyond combat technique. He developed a philosophy that prepared the Children of the Burn for their eventual role as humanity's weapons of revenge. Earth humans learned to fight on solid ground, with reliable up and down, he told his advanced students during his final formal class. "But you are not Earth humans. You are something new. You fight in the spaces between stars, where the only constants are the laws of physics themselves." The philosophy emphasized adaptation, patience, and the transformation of weakness into strength. Every limitation could become an advantage if approached with sufficient creativity and understanding. Chen's students became teachers, spreading the void dance throughout the ship's population. What had begun as desperate necessity evolved into art, meditation, and cultural identity. The ship's security forces officially adopted void dance techniques as standard training. Traditional Earth-based combat became supplementary rather than primary, used only in artificial gravity zones during specific scenarios. Chen's final prediction proved remarkably prescient. "When we finally meet the Vorex in battle," he told Maya during one of their last conversations, "they will expect human fighters to move like Earth. Humans, linear, predictable, limited by gravity-born instincts. They will deploy tactics based on their understanding of human limitations. They won't be prepared for warriors who dance with momentum itself, who use space as an ally rather than an obstacle, who have spent generations learning to fight in conditions that would cripple traditional soldiers." Chen Wei died in year 187, his body finally succumbing to the spinal injuries that had confined him to zero gravity decades earlier. But his death was not seen as an ending, it was a transformation. His consciousness was preserved in the ship's neural networks through Maya's interface technology, becoming a permanent teacher for future generations. The void dance he had created continued to evolve, guided by his stored wisdom and enhanced by each new generation's innovations. By the time the ship reached Vorex space, the Children of the Burn carried combat skills that no enemy could predict or counter. Chen's legacy was embodied in every child born aboard the ship. They learned to walk in 3 dimensions, to think in vectors and angular momentum, to treat the void not as empty space, but as a partner in the dance of survival. They were no longer refugees fleeing destruction. They were weapons waiting to be unleashed. The Warrior's Promise, year 217. Anya Soul, 16 years old, floated in the same training space where Chen Wei had first developed the void dance 60 years earlier. Around her, 100 other ship-sense warriors practiced forms that combined Chen's momentum mastery with Maya's technological integration. They moved like living art, their bodies tracing patterns in three-dimensional space that told the story of humanity's transformation from victims to predators. Anya paused in her practice, feeling the ship's engines change pitch through her enhanced nervous system. After 2 centuries of exile, they were approaching something significant. She resumed her void dance forms, each movement carrying the weight of her grandfather's legacy, her mother's sacrifice, and her people's unquenchable desire for revenge. Every spiral honored the dead. Every redirection technique brought them closer to justice. Every moment of perfect momentum control prepared them for the war that was coming. "Master Chen taught us to dance with physics," she said to her training partners, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. "Soon, we'll teach the Vorex to dance with death." The ship continued its approach vector, carrying its cargo of transformed humans toward a destiny written in the mathematics of momentum and the poetry of perfect violence. Next time, the Chaos Engine Protocols. How humanity learned to program artificial intelligence with pure, beautiful insanity, and why logical enemies never saw it coming.